Great. Well, before I say what I want to say, I'm just going to sum up where I think we've got to on the politics question after yesterday, because it kept cropping up, unsurprisingly. I think the first thing is that everyone acknowledged yesterday that the politics is absolutely crucial, but they didn't quite know what to do about it. There was a lot of talk about the vested interests and their impact on the political system, a bit about voter apathy, and a strong feeling that we need to stop pretending that the current economic and political system can solve the climate issue that we're facing. And I think above all, I sensed a really strong frustration that politicians aren't supporting us. And when we heard what we heard yesterday about, a 4-degree scenario, I think everyone was wondering, why isn't Parliament talking about this every single day? So I want to try and answer some of those questions by talking primarily about the climate leadership programme that I've been running for the past 5 years with Green Alliance. I called my talk the penny drop moment because my other half is an obsessive crossworder. And if you look on geeky crossword websites, of which there are plenty, they all go on about PDMs. And this is the moment for a crossworder when a series of jumbled clues in incredibly weird crosswords, a series of jumbled clues finally fall into place and the whole picture becomes clear and you understand what the setter was thinking. And I've seen this happen on climate change. I've seen it at the end of a long and sometimes quite fractious question and answer session with a climate scientist, talking to new MPs. And at some moment something clicks and the politicians realise what a deal this is. They realise actually that the development of modern societies, of economies and politics itself, in fact, has only been possible because of a stable climate. And they realise that we can't take this for granted anymore. And when you get to this PDM for the politicians, there's a tangible change of mood in the room. And they actually start processing what this means for themselves, for their party, and for their job as a politician. And I've seen this happen in 5 out of 6 of the sessions that we ran for new MPs. You can ask me about the 6th if you want. We've set up these sessions very deliberately to avoid the kind of deficit model of education where we bombard them with PowerPoint. And it's very much a Q&A with climate scientists, with policy experts, with people from their own political parties. And having done quite a few of these sessions and much more detailed work with MPs and their constituencies since then, I'm going to tell you about 4 things that I've learned and try to extrapolate from that how we can get more people to the penny drop moment and then consolidate that realisation, if you like, and help them build climate into politics. The first thing that is really obvious is that any chance to get out a good old feminist slogan, the personal is political. So politicians' outlooks are shaped by their education, by their work, by their personal circumstances. They're no different to you and I in that regard. And the point here is that if climate change hasn't figured as a salient issue in their lived experience, it's very much harder for them to engage with the issue, either emotionally or intellectually. If it hasn't been a big deal in the past 30, 40, 50 years of their life, why, they ask, should I start thinking about it now? Why should I, do this quite remarkable shift? I've managed to live for that long without really worrying about it. Why do I have to start now? And so we're very careful in these sessions to get MPs to talk to people who they do trust, who have been, who are sort of people like them, who have been thinking through climate change. Hence not starting with the sort of deficit model, but actually making it a conversation with people that MPs want to hear from. My second lesson is that there's a bit of a question about what we're protecting, and traditional environmental politics has been about protecting the environment. And of course, climate change changes that. It's about protecting the environment in order to protect us. And that is a big, big shift in environmental politics, I think. But the problem is that mainstream political philosophies up until now have been blind to climate change. And you know, we heard yesterday about the problems of trying to fit action on climate change into a free market focus. And you know, a focus on free markets and personal responsibility, as Naomi Klein said, just doesn't work well with climate politics, which requires a long-term collectivist response. And so you find that for politicians on the right, because they have that worldview, they will try and slot the science into that rather than starting with the science and saying, well, what does this mean for changing my worldview? And on the left, less talked about yesterday, interestingly, the focus has obviously been on social equity and fairness. And the problem with that is that environmental issues come to be seen with suspicion as a kind of luxury to be worried about once basic human needs are met. And so you have these two, you know, very well thought through political traditions which can't account for climate change at the moment. But I actually think that there's a bigger issue than that for political philosophy. I think whether left or right, what we've seen is, you know, the modern politics over the past, I don't know, 200 or 2,000 years, however you want to measure it, has actually been able to assume a broadly benign natural environment. And we can no longer assume that. But the political ideas are lagging behind the reality. We are all now creatures of a cultural world rather than a natural world. And we have been able to make these assumptions which are no longer valid. I think this sort of radical divorce from nature is at the root of a lot of the problems that politicians face. Politicians operate in the human sphere and they try and solve human problems, and they haven't realised that you know, we can no longer talk about what we do for environmental protection. We can no longer ask what we can do for the environment, but actually we need to start asking what the environment has done for us, needs to continue doing for us, and won't do for us unless we wake up to the realities of climate change. The next point is a very quick one, but it's just that up until now, environmental politics has been seen as a specialism. So you get some MPs who do health, you get some MPs who do education, and you get some MPs who do environment. The point of the point we want to get to in climate change is where it's beyond a specialism, where it's actually you know, it's actually something that is very relevant for politicians doing health policy, incredibly relevant for politicians doing economic policy, and we're not there yet. So MPs think that their environment colleagues can solve this one, and we want to spread that far wider. A lot of discussion yesterday about who could lead and who could follow, but I think the issue here is that the relationship between a politician and their constituents is very complex, and it's not about, you know, leading or following. It's actually about how can we as a community create the political space for discussion of these issues. It's, you know, politicians can lead, but they can't lead so far that they lose sight of the people following them. They need to be able to work with existing constituencies, push them along, and it's much more a kind of process of to and fro, a bit of leading, a bit of following, and moving that along. And I think we need a much more sophisticated understanding of that role. Lastly, and I think this is very much a plea to the community, to the people who are in these rooms and beyond it, if I look at the majority of research, whether, you know, in the social sciences or natural sciences, I would say that most of what we've done on climate change is in terms of creating a blueprint. We've been looking at, you know, the ideal way. We've been looking at emissions pathways. We've been looking at, you know, blueprints for green economies. We've been looking at, you know, how to create a zero carbon Britain, all that kind of thing. We've defined what we would like to be the end point. And that leaves a big problem for politicians, because they see this and they think, well, you know, we're here now, and we've got this blueprint. And I think it's a bit like, for politicians, it must be a bit like receiving some IKEA flat pack instructions and being asked to build a wardrobe, but you only have the instructions. You don't even have the constituent parts. And I think that what the politicians have to do is, firstly, to persuade people that they want a wardrobe, and that's no mean feat, because meanwhile the vested interests are saying that furniture is a mirage anyway and there's no use for this wardrobe. They've got to work out what the wardrobe looks like. They've got to motivate a whole team of people from across the economy to help them build this wardrobe. And most importantly, they have to make sure that the final thing that they've created is actually a wardrobe that does the job that you want it to do. And so I think that what I would like to see is much more focus on that job of helping politicians through that, you know, from when they get the flat pack instructions to when they build the wardrobe. And I think that process, that hand-holding, is vitally important. And we can get them to the penny drop moment, but once they've made that realisation, they need an awful lot of help in taking that into practical action.